Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor Miriam Lexman for 1 minute, please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If one is not ready to speak for freedom everywhere, we can expect freedom to be granted anywhere. China continues to subvert Hong Kong's autonomy, rule of law, fundamental freedoms, as well as international agreements. The latest unilateral decision by the National People's Congress of China to enact a national security law for Hong Kong seriously threatens the city's autonomy, rule of law and fundamental freedoms. It is expected that the law will introduce a range of vague and draconian charges. 2 weeks ago, over 900 political leaders worldwide, including many of you, made a joint statement condemning this move. The joint motion for resolution of this Parliament provides a clear and principled stance on this situation in Hong Kong and upholds the values on which this union has been built on, and on which should and must direct our foreign policy as stipulated in Article 21 of the treaties. I therefore call on all members to support this resolution and to stand with the people of Hong Kong.
Thank you very much. Now, Isabel Santos, please.
Muito obrigada, Sr.
Thank you, Chair. Since the signing of the Sino-British declaration to transfer Hong Kong, many inhabitants were fearing the day when the Chinese government would ignore the basic law and would undermine Hong Kong. Now, with the decision to implement the national security law in Hong Kong, the Chinese government has opened the path to the undermining of civil liberties and is threatening the one country, two systems law. The Chinese abuses cannot be tolerated. The importance of the strategic relationship between the EU and China cannot mean that we reduce our demands and our commitments and our values. Quite the opposite. We need to be demanding in relation to liberties, the human rights and the autonomy of Hong Kong and international law. That is what the EU is expected to do. Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to Hilde Voltmans for 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Mr. President, dear High Representative, dear colleagues. For me, it's very clear. I defend the one country, two system principle. So I stand with the people of Hong Kong and support their freedom of expression. The arrests of pro-democratic leaders, the violent crackdown of protesters and the new security law are an assault on the autonomy of Hong Kong. This Parliament is luckily united in a strong, very strong resolution asking China to withdraw the security law, to respect the freedom of people in Hong Kong and to show that it's willing to respect the rule of law. If not, we, the international community, should consider a case before the International Court of Justice and Magnitsky-style sanctions. And let me stress, Mr. Borrell, that with almost 500 million consumers of Chinese products, we have the necessary economic leverage to make a change. I want Europe to engage with China. I want Europe to look for a new China strategy. But we have to do this by defending our values and our interests. That's why I plead again to China, withdraw the security law and give the people in Hong Kong the autonomy that has been agreed upon in the one country, two systems agreement. Our group Renew stands for democracy, values, everywhere in the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to Mara Bizotto for 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, President. The Communist China is
dictatorship that represents the biggest threat to our democracy. The emergence of COVID-19, the war against Hong Kong, Chinese spies within the EU institutions are facts that illustrate what I've just said. It's scandalous that the Italian government and the EU are silent accomplices of what the Chinese regime is saying. Let's put an end to the lies and the games. The EU has to speak the truth on the crimes. Our values aren't for sale. And colleagues, it is clear that we are facing an economic war and that this is a civilization war that the Chinese have declared against the EU. We are in favor of the transatlantic alliance and we have to fight for our freedom and democracy. The Italians, Europeans and the free men and women of the world will never become the slaves of the Chinese communist regime. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would now like to give the floor to Elsie Kanko for 1 minute, please.
This commission has promised to be a geopolitical commission. Yet, so far, I have not seen proof of this. Instead, I've seen an external action service bend over backwards to appease Beijing. At next week's EU-China summit, it's clear that the Chinese are unwilling to make progress on any major issues. So, I ask the Commission, I'm asking you, why are you giving Beijing a free photo op while they use all their energy to wage a global campaign against democracy? The people of Hong Kong were promised their own system of governance. China is reneging on its promises with the national security law. If we are to truly defend democracy at home and abroad, we cannot just issue statements of support for Hong Kong democratic forces. We must back up our words with actions. The EU is trying to chart its own China strategy. I do not subscribe to some of the Cold War rhetoric that we have seen from Washington. But, as Margaret Thatcher once said, the trouble with walking down the middle of the road is you get hit by traffic in both directions. Where do you want to stand?
Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to Idoia Bieneva Ruiz for 1 minute, please. Yesterday in this Parliament we spoke about the death of George Floyd. We need to listen. We need to listen to what the racist comments we heard yesterday. There's been 20,000 deaths in the Mediterranean over the past few years. The European Union needs to do its homework, need to ensure human rights here at home and ensure that we are, rather than trying to be responsible for all the George Floyds in the world, we need to strengthen the governance structure so we can have an external policy on end of sanctions on gender equality and a range of other key important points. In Hong Kong, we have said that everyone should have the right to peaceful protest. We need to respect the terms of the Sino-British Declaration, but we also need to move beyond the Trump or British government declarations. We want mutual cooperation between the EU and China, where we can discuss the key points, but also the differences. Like everywhere in the world, we need more than just a free trade agreement which forgets about human rights. Thank you very much. And I'd like to give the floor to Carlos Puigdemont for 1 minute, please.
Very much, dear High Representative. The EU's objective on Hong Kong is to make China respect Hong Kong. Respecting Hong Kong means respecting international law and particularly the right to self-determination. Making China respect Hong Kong will open the door for a greater respect on human rights in all the country, and so would offer hope to peoples like the Uyghurs, today victims of a tragic ethnic and religious persecution. If, on the contrary, the EU fails on this purpose, If the EU just makes grandstanding rhetoric and Photoshop diplomacy, covering up the more unpleasant sides of these great economic partners of us, who's China, the discussion will be not on the concept of one country, two systems, but the EU will have shown yet again that it has one set of principles, two standards. Let me say that I don't trust much on this diplomacy that has shown its docility confronting Chinese pressures. But Mr. Josep Borrell, I'm ready to be surprised.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much. I'd now like to give the floor to Andreas Kubilius for 1 minute, please.
Mr. President, Mr. Borrell, really, of course, we are condemning what Chinese authorities are doing against democracy and against Chinese international obligations in Hong Kong. Of course, we are standing together with Hong Kong people in defence of their rights and their autonomy. Of course, the EU should make strong pressure on Beijing next week. But we can see some paradox in the actions of Chinese authorities. The attempts to destroy democracy of Hong Kong brings clear evidence that they are afraid of that small island of democracy. Usually, weak authorities are showing that they are afraid. And it reminds me, how Soviet Union collapsed. Soviet Union exactly had a weak authority and they were afraid of democracy. Chinese people are really clever people and prudent people. And China deserves to be, in the global leadership. But they need to learn, not to be afraid of democracy, and they need to learn democracy from Hong Kong and Taiwan.